In late February, Russia invaded Ukraine. The Ukrainians have a right to defend themselves. They can conduct that defense the way they see fit. However, America, Germany, Sweden, Britain, France, numerous other countries, we are sending large amounts of financial aid to Ukraine, large amounts of powerful lethal aid, and we are engaged in economic warfare with Russia on behalf of Ukraine. And we don't know how much this economic warfare is going to hurt Russia, and we don't know if it's going to hurt ourselves just as much or even more so than it hurts Russia. So since we are sending our money, our weapons, and our financial security to Ukraine, I believe we have a right to be critical of how Ukraine conducts its defense and how Ukraine conducts peace negotiations. For example, I believe if Volodymyr Zelensky had fulfilled his campaign promise of implementing the 2015 Minsk Agreement, none of this would even be happening right now. So I have said since the beginning that the absolute best case scenario is a negotiated peace as soon as possible to prevent civilian deaths and the destruction of Ukrainian cities. And I'm still saying that now. Things have taken an extremely dark turn. I talked about this from the beginning in the community section of my YouTube channel. I talked about how bad the atrocities could become. Now, our governments are trying to prevent us from seeing all sides of this conflict. Immediately, European governments began banning Russian media. In America, they can't just ban them because of the First Amendment, but they were deplatformed from everything. That's how things are banned in America. They're just mass deplatformed. Washington Post broke rank and published an article very critical of Kiev the other day. They have reporters on the ground in the capital city, and they would watch as Ukrainian politicians would say, today Russia has struck another apartment complex for no reason whatsoever other than to intentionally kill innocent civilians on purpose. Well, the Washington Post's own employees were seeing that there were artillery pieces and grad launchers parked next to these apartment complexes, and they would fire projectiles at the Russians. The Russians would triangulate the origin, fire projectiles back, and apartment complexes would get hit. The Washington Post had several different expert sources where they were saying, yes, Russia is killing people, but also Ukraine has an obligation under international law to prevent the deaths of their own civilians. And if Ukraine wants Russians prosecuted for war crimes, they can't do this because war crimes charges will never fly if the person hit an apartment complex by accident while trying to hit a grad launcher parked next to the apartment complex. Well, the Washington Post went to one of Zelensky's top military aides. His name is Alexei Arrestevich. I'm probably saying that's wrong. You've probably seen him in the news. He's delivered numerous addresses to the public about the war. He was born in Republic of Georgia. He went to high school and college in Kiev. He went to military school in Odessa. He's like a military psychologist. He worked for Ukrainian intelligence for years. He was even part of Ukraine's negotiation team for the Minsk Agreement. He's also a famous actor, and apparently he's a big celebrity on social media and YouTube. So quite an extraordinary individual. But what he said to the Washington Post is quite dark. He said that Ukraine is under no obligation to follow international humanitarian law or any international laws governing war. Now, this gets even worse when you look at some of the past comments he's made, because on at least 2 occasions he's been on video praising the tactics of ISIS. He says that the cruelty used by ISIS is an effective strategy.
Вот ИГИЛ, руководители ИГИЛ считаются сейчас одними из наиболее мудрых и удачливых стратегов, которые есть. Все рассчитано максимально точно, даже жестокость показная должна была производить определенное воздействие. Это бесчеловечная абсолютно стратегия, но очень высокого уровня, очень мудрая, с учетом конкретных интересов. Они очень правильно действуют. Есть большая книга, где проанализирован ИГИЛ хорошо, и там видно, что они применяют передовые методы хозяйствования, передовые методы управления, на самом деле. Тех, в которых нуждается весь мир. А параллельно это является терроризм, средневековая жестокость, сжигание людей, там, расстрелы, отрезание голов и так далее, и так далее. Но это абсолютно сетевая структура из будущего.
The city of Mariupol has been under a de facto occupation since 2014. It was originally a part of an area that tried to secede from Ukraine. An army spearheaded by volunteer militia recaptured Mariupol in the surrounding area. These volunteer militia, which are very hard line, were permanently stationed in the area. The one that is really well known is Azov, which has their headquarters in Mariupol. They have at least 2,000 members, maybe more. No one seems to know for sure. But there are some other ones like Donbass, which was stationed in Volnovakha and the surrounding communities, and Adair Battalion, which was stationed to the east of Mariupol. Now, before the Russian army and the Donetsk People's Republic separatist militias even got to Mariupol, horror stories started to come out. The first took place live on the air of a major Greek television show. So this part of Donetsk Oblast is where most of the Pontic Greeks in Ukraine live. Catherine the Great gave a bunch of land to the Pontic Greeks right here where they could live, but they had to be part of the buffer between Russia and the Tatars and Turks. So you had the Zaporia Cossacks, then Pontic Greeks, then the Don Cossacks, and then more Pontic Greeks. The Greeks and the Cossacks were like a buffer zone. So there was a lot of Greek media and Greek diplomats in Mariupol before the invasion started. And on this television show, there's a bunch of people, one of whom is a resident of Mariupol, live, and the other ones are talking about how evil Russia is and blah, 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 and they're chastising this guy for not leaving the city. And he finally yells out, he goes, "Hey, I can't leave. If I try to leave, I'll be murdered by these pro-Ukrainian militias." And then shortly after that, there was this video that went super viral. A lot of you have probably seen it. It's a dash cam video where there's a line of cars and these guys pull people out of the cars in front of the car with the dash cam. They murder one of the guys. Then the driver takes off and they open fire on him with Kalashnikovs. And allegedly that was Azov battalion murdering people who were trying to leave, allegedly. But what happened next was you had all these humanitarian corridors where people were leaving all these different cities in eastern Ukraine. But Kiev kept announcing that no one could leave Mariupol and Volnovakha, and it was all Russia's fault. Now, if you know anything about recent military history, you might know that Russia has conducted these humanitarian corridors in all the recent conflicts with great success. And negotiations were going on in Belarus, and Russia was even demanding that Ukraine allow civilians to evacuate Mariupol, and Ukraine kept saying, yeah, we agree, and then for 2 weeks, every day, Kiev kept saying, oh, we wanted to let people evacuate Mariupol and Volnovakha, but we couldn't, and it was all Russia's fault. And after a while, it started to seem like it probably wasn't Russia's fault. Now, there was this big group of Greek media and Greek diplomats that got out, and I watched the video that this one Greek news crew made. They said that after days of negotiation, they finally got permission to leave. No civilians were allowed to come with them. It was all diplomats and media from Greece. They left. They drove past all kinds of Russian tanks and just fine. The Russians let them pass. But no civilians were allowed to come out. And I've even been talking to a guy living in Lviv. And he's been letting people stay in his apartment who are evacuating cities in East Ukraine. Other people in his apartment complex have been letting people stay. And he told me that people were coming out of everywhere in eastern Ukraine except for Mariupol and this Volnovakha, which is a small city. But this was the only place where supposedly Russia wasn't letting people leave. Everywhere else, Russia was letting people leave just fine. Well, now there's multitudes and multitudes of eyewitness testimony of people from Mariupol, Sartana, Volnovakha, and other small villages in the area saying that Ukrainian forces, particularly these militias, were committing atrocities against civilians. Even the interviews that are being shown in Western media, the people from Mariupol are saying that the Ukrainian officials would not let them leave Mariupol, or were telling them that it was too dangerous to leave. And they say they had no idea that there was alleged humanitarian corridors open. They had no idea that the government of Ukraine and Kiev had supposedly agreed with Russia to open corridors for them to leave. Now, I made a montage of some of the eyewitness accounts. There's scores of these that have been given English subtitles. There's probably hundreds of them now. I imagine they're all over Russian television. However, they're being shown in China and on Indian media. I know of one, at least, that was shown in Brazil. And some more people who identify as Pontic Greek have made it to Greece. And so there's been some more of these allegations on Greek TV. There's at least one clip that was shown on a Polish channel, Polsat. But for the most part, these are highly censored in the West. But I did make a montage of some that I have on BitChute and Odyssey. And so I'll have links in the description so you can go watch those. Judge for yourself. I'm not telling you what to believe. Ukraine is saying one thing. There's a lot of residents of this area that are saying something completely different. And I talked about in previous videos why I thought the Taliban was less radical than Salafist groups in Syria that were sponsored and armed by America, Britain, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Kuwait, Qatar, a bunch of other countries. Because the Taliban, at least for the past several years, adopted a policy of actively trying to avoid civilian casualties. And the Taliban would enter an urban area just to show that they could take it over. And then when the bombs started raining, they would evacuate to prevent civilian casualties. The Salafist groups that America was sponsoring in Syria would just set up shop in a major apartment complex and tell the other residents, and good news, if the Syrian government bombs this place, you get to be a martyr. But if you leave, we might kill you as an apostate. Well, people in Mariupol are saying that Kiev declared Mariupol the hero city and was talking about how the residents of Mariupol were valiantly fighting. And there was Western media outlets calling Mariupol Ukraine's Alamo. Meanwhile, these civilians on the ground, starving, no heat, no electricity, no running water, trying to boil dirty water from mud puddles to drink, are saying that Ukraine was committing atrocities against them and they were not allowed to leave. It's starting to sound just like these Salafists in Syria who were using the civilians as human shields. And they saw the more civilians who die, the more it benefits their cause, because they could grandstand about it. And Western media would say, oh, Assad blew up another apartment complex full of innocent victims, and look at these heroic Al-Qaeda members trying to dig survivors out of the rubble. All right, that's how I feel about this. Post a comment, tell me what you think. Click the like button. Click the link in the description to see my montage of videos from what residents are saying their eyewitness accounts are from Mariupol. And click the subscribe button. New video every few days.